I'm sorry, we're not recording the meeting, but we are live streaming it. It
The
looks like
live
that is
stream has
going.
started.
Thank you, Shelley. I'm sorry, Commissioner. We're all set.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to call the meeting to order, and the first item on the agenda is the discussion of staff's compensation study recommendations. Nandini and Miriam,
Yes,
take it away.
great. Thank you. As an FYI, we are changing our, I want to talk about it at the board meeting on Thursday as well, but we are making some adjustments to how we're going to run meetings that are public based upon the incident that happened last month. We are moving to a format where people have to sign up in order to receive the Zoom link for public comment purposes. And the Zoom link will only be shared with the board and any staff who are going to be participating or presenting, and any person who registers to make public comment. And then everyone else will be can watch the live stream. We used to post the transcript, and so this is a little bit different because we're going to be live streaming it, but essentially it's the same idea. So in terms of this meeting, so last month, just to recap a little bit as to where we are with the compensation study, we had invited Miriam, who went through a presentation, Miriam Michaels from Korn Ferry, who went through a presentation of their analysis of CHFA's salary structure, their perspective in terms of which comparators we should be looking at, and analyzing our jobs by looking at the individual job descriptions that were provided to them and then making recommendations. So we said we would come back to you in a month and firm up our analysis and make a recommendation. So this meeting is really about presenting to you what our recommended path forward is. So if you recall, when Korn Ferry analyzed our job structure, our salary structure, they deemed that they determined, I should say, that we are at about the 65th percentile compared to the comparator markets. The comparator markets, if you recall, were HFAs, housing finance agencies, nonprofits, as well as a third being the general industry. They took a weighted average of all three comparators, and then they created job groups for all of the jobs at the authority. And every job is now been slotted into one of the 12 or 13 job groups. Each job group is assigned a salary range, with the median representing the target compensation for that particular job group, and the minimum and the maximum representing the range over which an individual might move through the job group. Their recommendation, and therefore my recommendation to you, is to allow us to seek board approval to A, accept the pay philosophy that has been devised by Korn Ferry, B, to approve the job groups as well as the salary ranges that have been proposed by Korn Ferry, and 3, to make certain adjustments in salary of individual employees. There are two types or two approaches for adjusting salaries, and I will briefly describe each of them. The first one would bring up to minimum any individual employee who is currently below the minimum of their new salary range. This affects approximately, I'm saying approximately because there are some calculations that we have to firm up, but it's approximately 20 or so employees. And it would cost somewhere around $100,000 to do, and with the additional cost of benefits payable on that amount of salary increase, we're looking at about a $200,000 price tag. We believe we can absorb the cost of this particular adjustment to bring people up to minimum within our current FY24 budget. There's another, there's a secondary or second approach that I am recommending that we consider. In addition to bringing people up to minimum, Korn Ferry is recommending that we consider adjusting people's salaries based on their progression to the midpoint of their range. The tenure of a person in their particular role, as well as job satisfactory performance in their role, would then make them eligible for a potential increase or an adjustment based on where we are determining the median of that particular salary range is. So in other words, if somebody has had 3.5 years of tenure in their current role, and Korn Ferry is recommending that we look at 7 years as the amount of time it would take for someone to progress from the minimum to the midpoint of that range, then someone who's been in their role for 3.5 years would get adjusted to halfway between the minimum and the midpoint if they aren't already there. Of course, it's all based on satisfactory job performance. And so if we made these adjustments to bring people closer to the midpoint based upon the two factors I just said, there is an additional cost, which, taking into account the cost of benefits, is around $600,000. So the total cost for doing a minimum adjustment for people below minimum, and then the second, which would be to adjust people, bringing them closer to the midpoint, total is $800,000, 200 of which we believe we can absorb in our current budget. And we would be asking the committee to recommend to the board our ability to amend the budget to provide for another $600,000. This would be a one-time adjustment. This would only happen this year. In following years, we would expect that performance-based merit or cost of living adjustments would allow individuals to continue to move within a salary range and above the median and so on and so forth. So we don't expect to have to do this every year. And then in the future, as we continue to perform compensation studies, hopefully they're not 10 years apart, we may expect to do another adjustment, but of course that remains to be seen based upon the market at the time and a lot of other variables. So my recommendation is for the committee to consider giving us the ability to ask the board to amend the current year budget, to adopt the pay philosophy, to accept the job groupings and salary ranges, and to recommend amending the budget for another $600,000. So with that, I'm going to stop and see if there are any questions.
Any question from the committee members?
Just one question I wanted to ask. Nandini, we'd also talked about the merit pool. So does that also, and I'm sorry, I've lost the beat on this. Does that also require a budget adjustment in the current year?
So the merit, yeah, that's a great question, actually. We have taken into account the merit and COLA adjustments that you approved in November for staff. So in other words, we're not doubling down, we're not increasing people's salaries or adjusting people's salaries beyond what may be necessary after taking into account COLA and merit. So let's just say an individual is eligible to receive a 2% COLA and a 3.5% merit for a total of 5.5% of their salary. This additional adjustment would take that 5.5% into account.
So, I have a question. The first grouping of 20 people, you mentioned that's 200,000.
Yeah.
The 600,000 is for the rest of the people?
So it affects another 20 or 25 people who aren't already, based upon tenure, at the percentage that they needed, we would want them to be as they make their journey toward the midpoint. In other words, Korn Ferry has recommended 7 years as the amount of time it would take somebody to go from minimum to mid. That's average based upon industry, various organizations. I mean, Miriam can weigh in here, but Miriam has told us it's somewhere between 5 and 10 years is how long it takes to get from minimum to mid. We're choosing 7 because we're neither, we like to be kind of in the middle. We think we want to be a little aggressive and competitive in terms of how we are positioning ourselves, but we don't want to be too aggressive at 5 or not aggressive enough at 10. So 7 is kind of in the middle. And on the way to the midpoint, based upon tenure and satisfactory job performance, we're looking to see where people are slotted. And if they aren't already at the percentage that they need to be in their journey to the midpoint, that's when we're adjusting someone's salary. So I don't know, Miriam, I don't know if there's a better way for me to say this, but
No, I think you've articulated it well, Anthony. I think the rationale behind it too is we're trying to reset here, and we're trying to bring in criteria that is credible and also fair across the organization to say, okay, if an individual, you've been in your role for a certain amount of time, we think that you're pretty proficient. You always want to look at performance as well, factors, and that was brought in, that perspective was brought in as we met with all the individual managers who have oversight over these roles. And I think it's really just, from a pay equity perspective as well, you have to right size everything. If you don't do this, then you're always going to be paying catch up as new hires come in. They may be paid more than current incumbents. That's not really what you want to have from a culture perspective. So this is a way of kind of addressing that and bringing everybody where they should be in the new structure, in this new pay philosophy.
So I don't remember what our, but sorry, Sarah, what our total budget was for salaries and benefits. But say last year it was $1 million. I don't know.
So salaries and benefits is approximately 30 million.
Okay, so can you give us some idea then what our next year's salary and benefits will be if we implement these 2 changes?
That's assuming everything stays static, right?
Yeah, just to put it in perspective, That's all.
So I would say, give me 1 second here while I do the math. So,
I mean, it's not $1 million increase every year, or is it? If we do 800 and 200, that's $1 million.
It's not $1 million increase every year,
because
but
these are extraordinary gains or increases.
they're one-time adjustments,
Right.
But we are talking about an $800,000 increase in next year's budget, right? We're talking 30 million to 30.8 million. So so the year later, it's going to be 30.8. It's going to be 30.8 unless we compress or.
Okay, so that is the perspective. Okay.
It is. Yeah.
But just 2 questions, but that 30.8 plus the cost of living plus inflation plus merit pool. So 30.8 would be the starting point, right?
Correct.
Right. And then just very quickly, I just want to make sure if we're taking into account, as you said, so we've got, let's say we have 2 people and they both are 3 years in their job, and so you want to bring them both up to, you know, half of half, right? A quarter, right? I'm a little worried about taking into account the merit, because the merit should be on top of, right? If I understood you right, Nandini, if they were getting a raise because of the merit, and now separately we're adjusting everybody to the midpoint, you've got two people both at 3 years. One was going to get a merit increase because they've been a high performer. The other was not. Now they're both getting adjusted, which is great, but the merit should be on top of that. Otherwise, I think you've got a potential morale issue where we're all glad that we've been adjusted, but the one who's worked, you know, 30% harder, we just washed that merit increase sort of out of the picture, right?
No, wouldn't that person, I mean, if I'm at midpoint, I will get a merit increase. And Nandini is below, so she's gonna get in percentages and then the merit increase. But if I'm at the midpoint, I will get my merit increase. Would that be the case?
So let's put some numbers to this. I mean, I think you can do it either way. I think you make a fair point, Lisa. I think I'm trying to balance what is a fairly heavy ask with you know, a policy that you know, that makes sense. So I appreciate your comment. So let's just say we two people who make $50,000 and the merit increase is 5% for ease of calculation. What you're saying is, what I'm saying is that if they each got 5%, they would now both be at 52,500. You're with me? And if they're 3 years into their job and the target salary is 60, then they each would get a $7,500 increase to get to 60, as opposed to a $10,000 increase. So Lisa, your point is that if they both got, if one person got merit, the other person didn't, well, then they wouldn't be necessarily getting adjusted if they did not receive merit, because they wouldn't have had satisfactory performance.
Is merit for everyone, even for
No.
just satisfactory?
Yeah.
So there's a difference in my mind between satisfactory and merit, right? So if they were both at 50 and you were gonna, and the bar is, you know, 60 that you're trying to get them both to, the one who was gonna get the 2,500 merit should be at 6250, 62,500, not 60. I would suggest. I mean, and if that's not a big budget number, you know, these are two different goals. One goal is to reward people who are doing more than satisfactory. The other goal is to get the whole workforce up to all who are satisfactory, up to a competitive level. If you tell us that economically the organization can't afford to do both, then I would understand it. But I think we should have that discussion. So I really hate to wipe out what was meant to be a reward for exceptional performance, because we are doing this other structural adjustment that is important.
Sarah,
I hear what Lisa's saying, because you want to have, and it does, this may equalize low and high performers, but I also think it is a big ask, 800,000. So I don't know. I'm on the fence there. I was wondering if you could describe the employees in the two categories. So the 20 that don't even make the minimum, are they more likely to be new hires? And then the ones that need the adjustment, are they low performers? Like, you know, that's why they're not at their midpoint. I'm just wondering, is there a way you can characterize the people in the two groups?
Yeah, sure. So the folks who are being brought to min, they're not necessarily, let me see if I can, just give me 1 second here while I look at their, I have the information here, so let me just pull it up. I don't have it right off the top of my head, but I would say that their average time in their roles is just over 2 years. So they're relatively new hires. So based on, you know, market conditions, demand, where the role fits within the organizational hierarchy. We may have been more aggressive with pricing or less, depending on what's been happening at the time. So I don't know that I would characterize it in any particular way, except it appears that most of these folks, the 22 that I mentioned, are relatively newer hires. In terms of the adjustments beyond that, right, the ones who are being adjusted closer to the midpoint, I did take a look at that, and it appears that there in that category, there are some folks who've been in their roles for a while. So there are some folks that have been at the organization for 10 years and they're still not at the midpoint. Or they've been here for 5 or 6 years in that particular role. Maybe there's places for them to grow. Maybe there isn't because they're a specialty. So I think it's a little bit more skewed towards people who've been here a little while longer.
It might be that their job was reevaluated. So it might be that their job has been undervalued. You know what I mean? Their particular job.
That's right.
That has
That
to
could be.
farmers, just that their job has typically not been valued correctly versus the market. And so they're going to get, and not because they're a local farmer. So, I mean, one of my thoughts is, maybe proceed with the plan as proposed. And then we're going to be talking about an incentive plan, and we're going to have merit increases that will help the top performers achieve, delta.
Yeah, and while I see Lisa's point, I can also argue it the other way and say that yes, merit does reward great performance, but ultimately we're looking at this as people kind of moving toward the midpoint and further. And so if you look at it from that perspective, I can sort of argue that the target is a particular salary and you're moving them closer as you're rewarding them for their performance, and then you're just making up any difference. So I guess I could argue it both ways. I definitely think it'll hurt more in terms of the board's viewing of this ask. I think it's a little bit more aggressive if we don't take into account merit and COLA. I'm more comfortable doing it the way I've said, but I'm also.
I think that it has to be separate. I think Lisa makes a really good point. Okay. We're bringing base salaries to market. That's goal number one. So we retain employees and we can attract new employees. The second part is we need to reward people who work hard and who achieve more. And so I see them as two separate goals and objectives. And from morale standpoint, I know if people are working hard and doing well, they need to be recognized for it. And it's how we communicate this, but I think it's two separate, distinct objectives.
I really think that's right. And what I worry about too, Nandini, and I'm actually just going to parrot back to you what you told us, which is that CHFA has a lot of positions that you've got people that walk out tomorrow onto the market and find, potentially a better paid job anyway. I sort of feel like if I were one of those folks who was in line for merit and then it gets washed out, you're almost incentivizing them to look elsewhere, I think. But Miriam, you might have a thought on this. I think it's just really important that you have the exceptional talent that we want you to have.
Yeah, I mean, typically you do want to decouple and show, okay, it's a market adjustment versus a merit. What we're trying to do here is to see how we could, make more efficiencies and look at it from, just a budgeting perspective as well. I mean, they should be, I always want to bring in the performance aspect because you don't want to just give a market adjustment for someone who's not performing. So you also have to take that into consideration. So I think that's what was also being used as a data point as well. But, you're right. It's, and at the end of the day, we've talked to the team about also, once all of this is applied, we have to do a recheck to see if there's any pay equity issues that come up as well. Because that's also a part of this, is to ensure that you're paying fair and equitably across jobs that are similar, that there's nothing that comes out in terms of gender or, race issues, anything like that. So we also have to do that check and balance once all of this kind of goes through both systems.
And I think, Marianne, maybe you can help us out here. What we could do is agree on the philosophy of bringing people that are the minimum within the 7-year range to the midpoint. Would that be an accurate statement?
Yeah, you have those that are below minimum, and then you want to bring those up to that the midpoint based on that criteria within the 7 years. Yep.
Within the 7 years.
Yep.
And then we have the merit increase.
Correct.
Whatever that is. And I got the first part. I don't know how the second part will play in. Now, all this is within budget constraints, and I think that we'll perhaps gonna have to have a conversation with the whole board and
Yes.
the finance of, because it's a big ask, right? So I feel like we have to have that discussion with the whole board.
So Selah, it's currently on the board agenda for this month. We would be, I look to you for your feedback in terms of whether you think it could go to board this month. If you prefer to do it differently, we could do that.
I think that we should have this presentation of the compensation, adopt a philosophy, and have the discussion. And then the board, we need to have the board or the majority to agree to, this is what we want to do, and then do a resolution in the previous meeting, perhaps. Because if we do it, we don't give time for people to think about it and do it in both the philosophy of bringing people to the midpoint of recommendation by the consultant, right? And within the time frame, just to make sure that we keep our staff, and then the merit increase, which can be part of that, and then what is the cost, right?
Okay. So you're saying, okay, so I'm just going to repeat what I heard. So what you're saying is, at this board meeting, we could present to the board a discussion, or have a discussion with the board around the compensation study, the philosophy, our recommendation, as well as cost implications, but don't ask for approval at this meeting. Come back for approval once they've had some time to digest and ask questions. Is that?
I could prefer that than rather just to bring everything and then asking them to vote without assimilating. Now, Heidi thinks differently. We can ask, is they comfortable? We can ask if they're comfortable, or if they want to come back. Heidi, you're muted.
Yeah, I would go with a positive. Like, okay, do we have enough information to make a decision? Yes or no? If we don't, okay, well, what more do we need? But the board is they're savvy. Everybody, they listen, they read ahead of time. I give them credit for being engaged. I feel like this has taken us a year to get from the time we started this to now, and a year is plenty long enough. Unless people, just looking at everybody's faces here, we're all like in agreement. We need to do this. If we need to bite the bullet, we need to do it. Now what else can we say?
I'm in favor of that.
It's not about what else we can say, right? Sorry, Lisa. It's about also giving a chance to be able to assimilate. Because all this presentation the first time, it just came, it was too much for me. I have to go back and kind of assimilate and read it. But to your point, we could bring it also the resolution. If the board is ready after the explanation, then we can vote. If they think that they need a little more time, then we can do that too.
That's great. And actually, that's the best of both worlds, because we prepared a resolution Of course we did, right?
Just one other
Um,
question, Nandini, before you get to the
yeah,
resolution. What is the actual delta if you don't just absorb the merit pay? How much is the merit alone? Because we talked about merit and COLA, I think. So I don't have a number in my mind. I don't know how much more we'd be talking about to
Yeah.
allow you to treat the merit separate from the leveling.
Yeah. I was trying to do some back of the envelope math, but I'm a little afraid to use it because I'd want someone looking over my shoulder. But I think the delta is around $200,000. So, you know, if that proves to be inaccurate, we can email you all and let you know. But
We've talked about 200.
So in other words, if you so we have a cost of living adjustment, right, which everybody gets, it's 2%. Then there's a 3.5 up to 3.5% pool for merit. Okay, that's about across the authority, it's around $400,000 or $500,000 based on 15 million of salaries. So if we adjust people's salaries up to the minimum or up to the midpoint based on where they are in their roles, and we take into account cost of living, because again, cost of living everybody gets, and it's sort of given, right? It's a given thing. So if we take into account cost of living, but not merit, which is what you've pretty much suggested, then we're talking about adding another couple $100,000 to the cost. In other words, the cost was 800,000 to do all of this stuff, right? But if we back out merit and say it's on top, it's cream, you know, it's cream on top, then you're talking another couple $100,000. So it'd be like $1 million.
So it would be like $1 million.
$1 million, and then we could probably absorb 20% of that, say, in our current year's budget, and then we'd have to ask the board to approve the rest as an amendment. So we can get really precise with the numbers. I don't want, you know.
I think that will be a good exercise, that we can bring that information to the board
course.
meeting so that they can
I have a
have.
question.
Sarah?
Is there a way to tweak the proposal to achieve a difference between the high performance and the lower performance? Like I heard you saying the performance is taken into account, but I'm kind of reading that to be they have to have performed at least satisfactorily. And if they did, they get to go to the midpoint, after 7 years or whatever. But don't you have different levels of performance? And is there a way? I'm just trying to think of a way to have both without busting the budget, I don't know. I'm just, because is that right? That as long as they're satisfactory, we're pushing them to the midpoint, regardless of how satisfactory or how well they perform?
Yeah, so I think generally what we've done with merit is if your score, so we have a scoring system. So if your score results in an overall satisfactory, so in other words, the number of your aggregate score is satisfactory or above. So like maybe what number is that, Maura? Do you know off the top of your head what satisfactory really means for us?
It really depends on the amount of money you have for merit. So it's sort of a fraction, but so I can't give you a number except to say that usually it's the majority of people are considered satisfactory. So the majority of people are going to be eligible for that 3.5%. And then there might be a very small number, a handful literally, that are way off the charts in terms of the evaluation, and they may get a little bit more. But generally the average, if for anybody who's satisfactory, would be the 3.5. That's the way we've done it traditionally. It doesn't mean it has to be done that way. You can do more gradations along the way in terms of levels, but that's the way it has been done.
It's just an
So
idea.
if staff have goals, if they meet all their goals, but they don't go beyond those goals, that will be considered satisfactory?
Yes, I mean, it's based on the performance assessment that the supervisor and managing director do. And so there are a number of fields that they're judged on, from accountability to service focus to teamwork, and they're scored along those lines. And then if they're better than average, if they're models or inspires, which are the terms that we use to say models is satisfactory and inspires is superlative, then they're eligible for the merit. And
All right.
most receive the average amount.
All right, so do you have some
So
work
to
to
bring
do?
this, so basically what you're suggesting is we could bring this to board in a couple days. We could figure out the math based on what we just heard, the feedback was in terms of the merit. We can present the options, we can talk about the budget, we can discuss the philosophy. Miriam will be at the board meeting and will be able to answer questions. If
Sure,
you'd
and
like-
I think that for the philosophy, we will have to ask the board to vote on it, because we want to, so that's the philosophy
Yeah.
that we want to have,
Yes.
right?
Correct, correct. So, I mean, Miriam can present what she did at the last meeting if you would like, or she could just be there to answer questions, and I can just present what I did today, maybe with a little extra work, work around why we're doing this, why this is important, how CHFA wants to move forward, and, kind of have the story behind the study. And then present them with the results, talk about the philosophy, and then ask for their approval if they're not willing to give it, or they want to hold off, or they have questions. We can.
Yeah, I'll ask if they're ready to vote. We could vote, and if they want a little more information, then we'll set up a time to go over the whole study.
Okay.
Sarah, what do you think?
Well, assuming the board hasn't seen any of the stuff that we've seen, they would like to hear from Miriam, our consultant, about the fact that we are underpaying our employees and there's a need here. You know what I mean? And then also from Nandini. I mean, maybe a brief presentation by all of them could get us over the hump, because they it. It's up to you.
Yeah, so Miriam, do you have like the summary pages, right? And then we can show what's the concept that we're trying
Yeah.
to. Perhaps some people don't have that concept, so they
Yeah.
go and so that will be important. Okay,
Okay.
thank you, Sarah.
Yeah.
Lisa?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, Nandini, I think it'd be really helpful to the board also to know what you want to do. It's great on one side that you say, well, I can see it this way, I can see it that way, but I think it's important. This is the organization that you every day have to drive, right? So I know you're still thinking through it and you feel a sense of responsibility, but for my part as a board member, I would want to know what you would most want. It doesn't mean that we'll get it, but I think it's important to know what your preference is as the person who has to run the shop.
I'll be careful, and I'll do that. I'll take care
Yeah,
of that.
once you do your calculations, your numbers, then you have.
It's
what
all
is
about the
deal breaker.
numbers.
Yeah, it's all about the numbers.
It is. So I appreciate all the feedback, and we'll work on it and see what happens.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you for all the work, and Miriam,
Yeah.
thank you. But Miriam, you're gonna come with us to the executive session, right? You're gonna go over with us.
Yes, Miriam is ready to go and
Yes,
talk to
I'm ready.
the
Yeah.
CEO report. Yes.
Do you need a motion to do that?
Yes.
So moved?
Thank you. Can I have a
Second.
second? Thank
Second.
you. All in favor, say aye.
Hi,
Thank you.
we stay on? We
And
stay?
I think John is gonna send us to
Yeah,
another.
Dawn is
room.
going to send you to a breakout room, essentially.
Yep. Give me just 1 second.
Well, that went well.
Just for the record, this room is still broadcasting.
It is.
Right, thanks.
You have a nice office, Lisa.
It's new, Heidi. You're very welcome to come
Oh.
visit. I'm right around the corner from CHFA.
Well, that's too far.
You can
Sorry.
just walk, huh?
Unless you're buying lunch or something, maybe.
I'll buy you lunch.
Okay,
I'm gonna
All right.
email your time.
okay.
Okay, so we make a motion to adjourn the meeting?
So moved.
Second.
Before you adjourn, there's a line in the agenda about making a recommendation to board? Did you make a decision about anything or?
So we have a couple of things that the consultant is gonna work with us. And for now,
Okay.
just leave it as it is, Nandini, and I'll talk to you after, like later tomorrow afternoon, because we have a couple of things that we need to do.
Okay. Are we going to leave it on the agenda or take it off the agenda?
Yeah, no, leave it on the agenda for now.
Okay. All right.